Final Fantasy XIV just sold out. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm...
Double barrel name, British accent, very well dressed in his videos. But he...
Double-barreled British, very well-dressed man. And if you've been joining me on my Twitch streams that normally happen after these video premieres, you've been playing some Final Fantasy XIV with me. You've been joining me as I adventure through the land of Eorzea, along with every major streamer, to be honest. Bellular's tried it, Asmongold's trying it. Everyone is giving Final Fantasy XIV a go. In fact, so many people are trying Final Fantasy XIV that momentarily the Square Enix store actually sold out. It sold out of an MMO RPG. Don't worry, it's not hit the character cap, there are still server spaces left, but the recent surge of players was unprecedented. Over the last 2 weeks, Final Fantasy XIV has seen a massive boost in popularity, but it wasn't always smooth sailing for this game. So let's have a look back at its awful beginnings and examine one of the greatest comeback stories in MMO history. Before we begin, consider dropping a like on the video or subscribing to the channel for more MMO stuff. Ring the bell for all the future videos, and a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch. More on this at the end. For now, let's begin. MMORPGs are incredibly expensive and complicated to make, and they are one of the riskiest genres to go into. It is highly likely if you make an MMORPG you will not see a return on investment. You need hundreds of people, thousands of hours and millions of pounds. You need skilled developers, skilled designers, level creators, musicians, voiceover artists, network architects, public relations, marketing. Every single person in your team needs to have such an incredibly complex skill set. It's hard to even find a group that could make an MMORPG, never mind actually make one. If an MMO launches and fails, chances are you're bankrupt, because you've just spent tens of thousands of hours and potentially tens of millions of pounds developing a product that you're not going to see a return on investment on. If you'd spent years of your life and millions of pounds developing a game and it didn't do very well, what do? Well, Final Fantasy XIV knows the answer to this, because when it first launched, it did not do well. Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0 was not good, releasing in 2010 and shutting down only 2 years later in 2012. It did not sell well, and it did not impress the reviewers, with IGN only giving it 5.5 out of 10 and PC Gamer marking it at 30%. In the first few months it only sold around 600,000 copies, which sounds a lot, but for an MMO is not that many. Safe to say, Final Fantasy XIV was a flop. Critics called it broken, an incomplete mess, saying it was released long before it was ready. The combat system and the experience was overly grindy, and the crafting and skilling system had convoluted interfaces and were riddled with bugs. It wasn't all bad. The music was top-notch, and the leveling and job system was widely praised in itself, but small elements of brilliance within an overall awful experience can't save a game. Now, critics and players did agree on one general point. Eorzea was not a terrible fictional land. There was potential there, but Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0 definitely wasn't realising that potential. Now, this wasn't just a case of releasing a patch, or an update, or an expansion pack that would fix things, because the things that were the problems, the bugs, the menu, the UI, the combat, that was all stuff at the foundation level. That was inherent in the building blocks of the game. That was an engine issue. The only way they would be able to fix the major flaws that Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0 actually had was to scrap absolutely everything, go back to the very foundation level of game creation, and rebuild the whole thing from scratch. And that's what they did. At the 2011 Tokyo Game Show, Square Enix issued an official apology to the fans and the players, saying the Final Fantasy brand had been greatly damaged. Square Enix admitted fault. They openly admitted they could do better, and they asked for forgiveness. And to mark this momentous event in-game, the Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0 servers were merged, and in November of 2012 all players were invited to an apocalyptic, world-destroying in-game event where the in-game lore saw an actual calamity happen and the real-life servers shut down to match the timings. As bad as this was, this is a fantastic way to see your game off, with an actual in-game apocalyptic calamity ending everything for the developers and the players. With blame admitted and Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0 blown up and scrapped, they set about to do what very few companies would ever have the money or the time or the skill to do. They started again from a completely blank slate. They remade the entire game, but so much better. Final Fantasy XIV version 2.0 began to take shape, and they actually decided to include the destruction of version 1 as inspiration for their in-game lore. They added the subtitle A Realm Reborn, and when you start playing Final Fantasy XIV now, you will hear about the calamity, the destruction of the world, and how no one can seem to remember what happened years ago. Square Enix had not only admitted their failures, they had used them to influence the new Reborn game's lore. The calamity was a real event. It did really happen. And there are other references to version 1.0 of the game spread throughout A Realm Reborn. To spend years of your life and millions of pounds making an MMO is one thing. To release it and have negative feedback and negative critical reception, that sucks. To then blow up your own game because it's not as good as you could make it, that's pretty ballsy. But to then take the actual destruction of your game and rebuild it from the ground up using that destruction as the new game's lore, that's genius. Square Enix knew they could do better. They knew Final Fantasy XIV could be something magical, and version 1.0 definitely wasn't it. So when they released version 2.0, they did quite a lot better. Releasing in 2013, A Realm Reborn was critically praised, gathering multiple 5-star reviews and a 9.5 out of 10 from Forbes, also winning MMO of the Year from Game Informer. It's safe to say the gamble to destroy version 1 and build version 2 paid off. Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn went from strength to strength, releasing major expansion packs: Heavensward, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, and coming soon, Endwalker. And each expansion pack was exceptionally well received, and this leads us to now. With major streaming personalities like Asmongold trying the game on Twitch and gaining several million views, and major gaming sites reporting on the game's sudden renaissance, it has been met with so many people trying to download it at once right now that the Square Enix site momentarily sold out of digital download codes. Digital codes are generated to authenticate the game when you launch it and connect it to the servers. The limitation is usually based on how many players the current servers can handle or how many new players they're expecting on a week's basis. To reach that limit with an MMORPG is not completely unheard of, but it's still a very rare occurrence. It shows that player demand for the game is higher than Square Enix were expecting right now, and Square Enix will need to react to that and provide more servers, which I assume they're more than happy to do. Final Fantasy XIV is full of redemption arcs. It's a story-driven RPG with an MMO tacked onto the side of it, and Square Enix went through their own real-life redemption and improvement arc. They released a game, it sucked. They admitted it sucked, they blew it up, they learned from their mistake, and then they released one of the best MMOs ever made. I think over the next few weeks and months we'll see just how much player retention power Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn really has. And personally, I'm confident it will not only hold its impressive boost within the MMO world, but it will continue to push this advantage. Final Fantasy XIV knows what it's like to fail. They know what it's like to rebuild, and they know that players nowadays will accept nothing less than the absolute best the team can do. And in case you didn't know, there is a free trial, which contains the entire base game and the first major expansion pack, Heavensward, with no time limit, and PlayStation, PC and Mac players all play together. The boost in players Final Fantasy XIV has seen over the last few weeks has been absolutely unprecedented, and I hope it continues. I've been having an absolute blast playing on the Omega server. If you're around, feel free to add me or drop me a message and say hi. It's lovely to talk to people, and I'm loving doing all the raids and dungeons with you guys on stream. But I want to know about your experiences with this game. Were you around before the calamity happened? Did you join when A Realm Reborn first released, or have you joined this surge of players and you're experiencing Eorzea for the first time? Let me know in the comments below, and hopefully I'll see you in game sometime. Cheers for watching. Another massive thank you to the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel going. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and Discord. And as always, have a great day.